Imagine Munich, 1923. A smoke-filled beer hall, the air thick with failure. A lone figure stands on a chair and his voice, a blade of pure intention, cuts through the haze. It finds the ears of a few bitter men. Fast forward 15 years. That same voice now echoes inside 50 million skulls, each one believing his will is their own. This wasn't accomplished with armies or overt force. It was done with a set of psychological keys, forged to unlock and overwrite the human soul. And here's the disturbing part. Those same keys are still being used today, only now they travel at the speed of a share. Stick around, because once you see the playbook, you can't unsee it. The opening move in this dark psychology playbook was to exploit a nation's deepest wound. Post-war Germany was more than a broken country. It was a gaping psychological wound. A nation's soul had been laid bare, its pride methodically dissected. A loaf of bread required a wheelbarrow of cash. Children played with stacks of currency rendered meaningless. Into this chasm of shame, Hitler offered no comfort. He offered a seductive poison, a narrative that gave the agony a target and the humiliation a purpose. But poison alone wasn't enough. The real trick was how he rewired perception itself. The next stage reveals his so-called solution, a manipulation tactic straight out of the darkest psychology. His formula was deceptively simple: hijack reality itself. Germany was not defeated, it was betrayed, stabbed in the back. Your suffering was not the aftermath of war. It was a relentless assault by an unseen enemy. He didn't just offer them a scapegoat. He fundamentally rewired their perception of cause and effect, recoding rage as the only logical response. And the way he pulled it off, that's where the dark psychology begins to show. The first strategy Hitler used is what we call in dark psychology the grand lie that becomes gospel. Construct a lie so monumental, so audacious, that its very scale paralyzes disbelief. Global conspirators engineered Germany's ruin, not a treaty. This was never a mere slogan. It was a thought virus, released into the cultural bloodstream. A thought virus meaning an idea so sticky, it spreads like infection and mutates culture itself. It appeared on posters, was woven into children's lessons, and whispered between radio broadcasts. The objective wasn't to convince, but to saturate the mind until there was no room for anything else. Soon the mind defends the lie, not because it believes it to be true, but because the alternative, admitting you've been so profoundly deceived, is a psychic abyss too terrifying to face. And once a lie that big takes root, the next step is inevitable. The second dark psychology tactic was to forge a unified hate catalyst, transforming private misery into collective rage. Hitler did not invent animosity. He industrialized it. He took every disparate misery, a jobless father, a hungry child, a forgotten soldier, and gave them all one single public face. Through relentless, distorted propaganda, millions of scattered resentments were channeled into one supercharged current of blame. This is a dark psychological transaction. When your own life feels insignificant, there is a sinister comfort in being granted a license to despise. But hate alone doesn't hypnotize a nation. You need something even more powerful: rhythm. The third strategy was rhythmic entrancement, a form of mass hypnosis crafted through voice, cadence, and ritual. He became a master of cadence and control. His speeches were not lectures, they were rituals of mass hypnosis. He would begin in a low conspiratorial whisper, forcing the crowd to lean in, to surrender their attention, to synchronize their very breathing to his. Then, the escalation, the deliberate rhythm of his phrases, the rising crescendo of his voice, the surge of his gestures, all engineered to weave a collective trance until thousands of separate minds pulsed and roared as a single, mesmerized organism. The chants, one people, one empire, one leader, were not just slogans, they were the final percussive beats that sealed the spell. But even hypnosis can fade. To lock it in, you need spectacle. The fourth tactic in Hitler's dark psychology playbook was the architecture of awe, overwhelming the senses until the self dissolved. He knew you don't just persuade the mind, you must overwhelm the senses until the self dissolves. The swastika was not a logo, it was a psychological sigil, basically a symbol designed to hijack emotion at a glance. The Nuremberg rallies were not political assemblies, they were vast occult rituals, towering cathedrals of light piercing the night sky, oceans of bodies moving in perfect unison, the very ground trembling with the rhythm of marching feet. It was all designed to annihilate the individual, to melt personal doubt into a tidal wave of collective euphoria. It injected a potent, addictive sensation. Here, you are not small. Here, you are part of a god. And once you feel that high, the architecture of control is almost complete. All that's left is to shut the doors of the mind. And the fifth and final strategy was the perceptual prison, sealing the exits of the mind and leaving no thought untouched by propaganda. He didn't just broadcast his message. He constructed a fortress around the consciousness of every citizen. Cheap, state-issued radios became conduits for a single, omnipresent voice. Education was twisted to teach racial dogma as biological science. Dissent wasn't merely punished. The very words to express it were methodically erased from the language. The result was an echo chamber so flawless, the thoughts you believed were your own were merely the pre-approved reverberations of the state. And that's when the transformation was complete. The outcome was devastating. By 1939, the psychological architecture was complete. A nation of artists and thinkers had been seduced into a cult of paranoia. The mental programming that manufactured absolute loyalty also engineered a capacity for unimaginable cruelty. The dark triumph was this: the millions who marched were not monsters born of some innate evil, but ordinary people whose internal software had been virally corrupted, their moral compass deliberately and magnetically reset to point directly into the abyss. And now comes the modern warning. Strip away the uniforms and the banners, and the techniques are disturbingly timeless. Grand lies now propagate at the speed of a share. New scapegoats are algorithmically selected and served to our feeds. Digital architects build platforms that exploit the very same triggers of tribal belonging and existential fear. The warning signs are encoded in the pattern. The narrative that is dangerously simple, the enemy who is always a caricature, the truth that feels true only because you've heard it 1,000 times. If any of this feels familiar, it's because the ghost in the machine is still whispering the same old spells. History does not repeat itself, but the architecture of the human mind is a stable target. What modern slogan, trend, or idea gives you that cold, creeping feeling of being guided? Share your thoughts below. And if you want to learn how to build a firewall for your own mind, subscribe. Because the most potent defense is learning to recognize the playbook while the first page is being turned.